Want to see how I made these number boards work? Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Welcome to DCC Shop. In this episode, I'm going to continue working on the SP GP40P-2. Originally, I planned this as a two-part series, but I think it's going to take more than that to get it done. This is part 2, and I'll be focused on the number boards. So in the first episode, I focused on the chassis of both engines, and I installed Loksound decoders and hooked up the speakers. I had to do a custom speaker in 3199 because that was originally a DCC ready model, whereas 3197 had a factory speaker already. Other than that, they're pretty much the same setup. In this episode, I'm going to focus on the shells and install new lighting. So as in the first episode, I'm going to focus on 3197 and only talk about 3199 if there's something different about it. Now this locomotive originally had bulbs in the headlights and in the oscillating light. I removed those. The number boards were not lit. I want to light those up. And the class lights were not lit. I want to light those up. And the emergency light was not lit. I also want to light that. I want to light the rear class lights as well, and of course the rear headlight. As you can see, this engine doesn't have the SP light package in the back, which is correct for this particular locomotive. Not all SP engines did. Something I find useful to do sometimes is to put the shell kind of like this next to the chassis so you can kind of see what the clearances are like. We've got about maybe an inch or so in the back to do the rear lighting setup, which is not a lot of room, but it's doable. And in the front, the nose area is fairly open, but you do have to deal with this thing. Hopefully the headlight is above that. You can also look at it from this angle, which gives you more of a profile. And now the shell is sitting on the ground, so to speak, so it's a little bit lower than it would be when it's actually resting on the chassis. But that's still good enough to give you some idea. So I can see here that this piece is probably low enough that it's not going to interfere with the front headlight. And this is low enough that it should be able to do the cab lighting and get the wires over this. We have clearance. And then in the back there's a fairly good amount of clearance back here. The headlight is high enough that I don't think this should be a problem either. So I think we're pretty good in terms of not having to grind material off of the chassis, hopefully. In the first episode I mentioned that I didn't want to remove the cab because I thought it would risk damage to the model. So if at all possible, I would like to leave it in place. That does create a little bit of complication, however. It's going to make it a little more difficult to get light up here to the oscillating light. So what I'm going to do is use some fiber optics, run them back into the middle of the engine, and then put a 3mm LED somewhere back here. There should be enough clearance above the decoder for that. For the rest of the lights, the number boards, the class lights, front headlight, emergency light, and the rear headlight, I'm going to use surface mount LEDs because those don't take up as much room inside the shell. So to make lenses, I use fiber optics for everything, and I use 20 thousandths for the class lights and 30 thousandths for the headlights. And what I do is use a lighter and flare a little lens onto the end of it. So making these lenses is a little hit and miss. I probably throw away 50% at least of the ones that I try to make. You want it to be nice and straight on the end, if you can see that. And it should be shaped kind of like a football in cross section. Gives you a nice little bulge on the front and a little bit of a bulge in the back that kind of mimics a reflector. I'm going to go through some of the LEDs that I'll use for this project. This is the 3mm type. They usually come with fairly long leads, and you can get these in a variety of colors. This is a warm white. I would recommend only taking them out of the package when you're ready to use them, because the warm whites look just like any of the other colors, and it's really easy to get them mixed up. It's just a clear casing. So I try to make sure to just use one at a time. That way I know what I'm using. The other type of LEDs I primarily use are surface mount LEDs. This is a 603 size. They also come in a 402 size, which is a little bit smaller. This one has leads pre-soldered, and as you can see on this one, the leads kind of come off one end, sort of putting the LED in orientation so that it's in line with the wires. This is really good for ditch lights because you can put these into a ditch light housing. Don't have ditch lights on these locomotives, but they're good for that. And they're good for certain other situations. You can also get these loose. They usually come in little rolls like this, and you peel back the plastic cover and just take as many of these out as you need. And then you have to solder your own leads to them. And for that, I usually use solderable magnet wire. It's a little bit of a challenge to solder because they're so small, but in some situations I prefer that. I usually get my LEDs on eBay and I just search for them because the sellers kind of come and go. So if I want a 3mm, I just search for 3mm warm white, or other colors. If you want a different color, they have all different ones now. If you want the 603 size, you can search for that too. Sometimes they call them SMD for surface mount. And you can get them, like I said, with or without the leads attached. The other thing that's really important are resistors. I usually use a 750 ohm to 1K ohm resistor for headlights. Sometimes a little bit more resistance for other types of lights that don't need to be as bright. Although I've found that the actual resistor value, unless you get a really high resistance, doesn't tend to change the apparent brightness of the LED that much. So, usually something around 1K, give or take, is fine. So as far as 3mm LEDs go, one of the leads will go to a larger metal piece on the inside and the other one goes to a shorter metal piece. The shorter one is the positive. That goes to the blue wire typically for your decoder. So that's how I remember it, because the leads come in different lengths, but I usually cut those off real short and then just solder the wires directly here. So it's important to remember that the blue wire goes to the short piece inside the LED. So this is what I was talking about. The positive lead is longer, and that goes to that little short thing inside. But I'm going to cut these off. So having some sprung tweezers is really handy for this kind of work. I'm going to tin the leads. And I'm going to solder a resistor with the lead shortened right to the negative. I'll solder a blue wire to the positive. And I'll put some heat shrink tubing on it. Since this is the oscillating light and there isn't really any color coding for that, I'm going to use some green wire. By the way, you can get these wires from TCS and ESU. They sell packages of different colors. Digitrax also sells some in a multi-pack, which is okay if you're just starting out, but you tend to use more some colors than others, so I would recommend probably buying individual colors if you're going to plan to do a lot of DCC installs. So now this LED is ready. You could put the resistor on the blue wire if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter. I just, by convention, like to do it on the negative side. It's always a good idea to test the LEDs and make sure that they work and that they're the right color. So while I've been working on this video project, I found these LEDs online. These are from a company called Eve Model, and they're 603 size surface mount warm white LEDs. I think there's 20 in the package, and it also comes with resistors. These are the larger 1/4 watt resistors. I prefer smaller ones just to save space, but these would certainly work. These also come with the wire kind of going off one end. However, the wire is flexible enough that you can bend it like this, and this type of configuration where you have one wire going in each direction off the end of the LED is very useful in some situations. The only thing I noticed about these after playing with them a little bit is that they used red for the positive and orange for the negative, so I'll have to remember that when I'm wiring everything up. If I solder my own, I usually like to do a few of them at a time, and I use 3 pieces of tape, 1 sticky side up and then 2 sticky side down to hold the middle piece. And then what I do is I put the LEDs on the sticky part of the tape and it holds them in place while you're working. So there's a symbol on the bottom of these LEDs that looks like a little T, and the base of the T points at the negative side. So it's important to keep that in mind when soldering. They're really hard to see because they're so small. You probably, I'm getting to the point where I need magnification to look at this stuff. I'm sure other people are in the same boat. But, I try to put them on the tape all in the same orientation so that at least I can remember which side is which. So after opening that package of pre-made LEDs with the magnet wire soldered on them, I decided not to bother making warm white ones because they're already done for me. However, I did make some red ones because I didn't have any of those with pre-soldered leads. So same technique. I soldered them off camera because it's just too fussy to try to do it on camera. But I used some tape and I labeled this red so I'll know which ones are which. I only really need 2 of these, 1 for each engine, but I made 4 just in case. So just like with the white ones, it's a good idea to test the red ones to make sure that they work as well. Now that I've prepared a bunch of LEDs, I can start actually installing them in the model. So first I'm going to tackle the number boards. No particular order here, but it's just what I want to do first. To light up number boards, you need two things. One, you need a light source, and two, you need translucent material so that the light can actually shine through the number board. I'm using my model of 3199 here because the paint job makes it a little easier to see. But if you can see in the back here, there's actually a flat piece of plastic inside each number board. A lot of Athearn EMD cabs are like this, and this is actually a great place to mount an LED. I'm using a number 76 drill and a pin vise to make holes in that material in the back. The exact size of holes doesn't really matter. They just have to be big enough to pass the magnet wire for the LEDs. So if you look in the middle of the number board, you can see two holes, one on either side of the center point, more or less. This isn't super precise, but the idea is the LED will go between those holes and wires from the LED will pass through those holes. So now comes the fun part where I get to do this off camera, and through the magic of TV it'll be done later. I need to fish those wires through the holes in the number boards, run them through the cab, and have them exit out this little hole in the back of the bulkhead behind the cab where the original light wires came through. Well, that was a lot of fun. Model railroading is fun, right? Anyway, I got these in there and I used a little drop of CA to secure them inside the number board openings. So the LED itself is centered between the two holes, and you got one wire going through one hole and one wire going through the other hole. So doing this got a little fun because of a couple of things. One, there's a little stud in here. I don't know if it's kind of hard to see, but it's part of the cab roof and it extends downward. And then this wire is also super flexible. The wire tends to bunch up inside the cab, so I made myself this little tool out of some scrap wire. This is 19 thousandths brass wire, but you could use anything that was, as long as it's rigid enough to work. But I bent a little hook in the end of it, and then there's an L shape. So I was able to use this to reach into the cab through that little hole with the stud in it, and then draw the wires through if I could catch them. So it took a few tries, but I did get them all through. Since 3197 was a little bit difficult to do, I decided to try a different tactic with 3199. I twisted the leads together on each LED. Doing that let me put both leads through the same hole, and because the wires were twisted together, it's a lot stiffer and it was easier to get it through the back without resorting to my special tool or anything. I was able to just push it through after a couple of tries. The reason I don't maybe like this quite as well is because it's a little more difficult to glue the LEDs down. I use some CA to do that, but you don't have the mechanical stability of having a wire on each side of the LED. You just have a wire on one side, so until the glue sets, it's a little more difficult to get it to stay where you want it. For the next step, I'm going to use some matte medium, which is if you're not familiar, it's a product designed for artists who use acrylic paint, but it also makes a pretty good adhesive. I've mixed the matte medium with a little bit of water, and I'm using a micro brush to kind of apply some around the LEDs. I'm doing this because I don't completely trust the CA to last. So this will act as an additional adhesive, and the matte medium will remain flexible so that if the CA ever cracks and starts to let go, hopefully the matte medium will keep the LED in place. I'm especially concerned about 3199 since the wires are only on one side of the LED in this model, and it doesn't have as much of a mechanical restraint. So I think adding a little bit of matte medium should help to stabilize the lights. It's unlikely that anything much is going to happen to them in here because they're in a pretty protected location, but still, this is just a precaution. You don't have to worry about getting the matte medium on the LEDs either because it'll dry clear. If you don't have matte medium, you could also use some diluted white glue or canopy glue or something similar. I just prefer matte medium because it stays flexible. While that's drying, I'm going to shift gears and work on some resistors. So it's really important to have one resistor per LED, otherwise sometimes you get weird results. So what I like to do is I take two, since there's two LEDs, one for each number board. These are actually 2K because the LEDs don't have to be that bright. And I take one end and twist them together. After soldering them, I cut the leads short and I end up with something that looks like this. The end that's twisted together goes to the function wire from the decoder. That way I only need one wire. Basically, the rule is if with the decoder, you need to have one function per light that needs to operate independently. So since the number boards aren't going to operate independently, they're just going to both be on or both be off. I can twist these together and just use a single wire. And then on the other side, these two will go to the magnet wires from the LEDs. And I generally put the resistors on the negative side, just by my own convention. You could put this on the positive side if you wanted to, but I just prefer to do it the other way. When you cut magnet wire, you have to tin the end. If you have the solderable kind, which you really want to have, it's really easy. You just heat it up a little bit with a soldering iron and it should turn silver, and that's how you know it's tinned. If you don't get solderable magnet wire, this is really much more difficult. And sometimes you can sit there for a really long time before it'll actually tin. The positive wires from the LED are going to end up connected to the blue wire. So I like to twist these together and then I tin and solder them at the same time. Sometimes it really helps to have some sprung tweezers to hold things steady while you're soldering. These little magnet wires tend to move around a lot. So I finished the connection to the resistor, put some heat shrink tubing on it. I like to run the tubing up a little bit over the bottom of the resistor just to make sure that it's completely sealed up. And then the other one is here. This will go to the blue, like I said before. There's always a little bit of dilemma in how much slack to leave. This is fairly long, but you know, we can't crawl inside the shells of our engines to work on them. So, and also you need to have some leeway when you're pulling the shell off the engine so that you don't rip the lights out or break wires or something. So it's important to leave enough slack, but not too much, because you don't want a lot of excess wire inside the shell either. So I usually, I don't know, a couple inches, 3 inches is, about what works usually for me. Of course, the real test is to make sure they still work. These look pretty good. As you can see, these are actually pretty bright, even with the 2K resistors, and I have another 750 ohm or 1K resistor in my little battery tester thing that I rigged up. So even with all that, it's still pretty bright. So I'm definitely going to have to turn down the brightness in the CV settings when it comes to programming the decoder. Now that the number boards have lights in them, I need to work on the second part of the equation, which is having number boards that you can see through. Now, a lot of times Athearn will use clear plastic inserts for their number boards, even though they're not really lit. I'm not sure. These look like they might be clear or made out of black plastic. I'm trying to see here if they're just painted black or if they're actually black plastic, because if they're black plastic, that's not going to work. I'm using a little isopropyl alcohol and the same tape, although it's not really sticking. The IPA is making it come up. Same tape I used for the LEDs. The alcohol is making these not stick to the tape very well, but I am starting to see some color on the brush, which is a good sign. It's taking a while, but I can actually see through these now. They're painted black on both sides for some reason, so I need to get all of this off. So I'm just going to keep working the microbrush and some isopropyl alcohol until I get these cleaned up. It took a little time, but I did finally manage to get all the paint off, and I've put these back on a piece of tape. I'm not sure how well this is going to show on camera, but these have beveled edges on the short sides. That's because they fit into an angled housing, and one has to be the left one and one has to be the right one. So they need to go basically in opposite directions. That'll be important later. So I'm going to coat one side of these with some microgloss. And that's because when I put decals on, they don't stick very well to bare plastic. So it's good to have something. This is essentially just a clear coat. So this is what I'm using. This is microgloss by Microscale. You could also use any clear coat gloss paint. Decals stick better to a glossy finish, which is why I use gloss. But you just need to coat the backside. This is Microscale sheet 87-205. These are lightable number board decals. This sheet comes in two different flavors, and I'm not quite sure which one is the current production version. This one has white numbers with a black background, and this one has clear numbers with a black background. You can use either one, but if you use the one with the clear numbers, you have an additional step to do, which we'll talk about in a minute. As I mentioned earlier, if you look at the number boards edge on, and this is really hard to see without magnification, they actually make a kind of a parallelogram shape and not a rectangle. and it's important that they're oriented properly so that they fit back into the angled number board housing properly. I let the microgloss dry overnight just to make sure that it's fully cured. Then I position the number boards on the tape so that they're angled just like the diagram, and now I can go ahead and start putting decals on them. If I didn't already mention it, the microgloss is actually on the back side of the number boards, and I'm putting some microset on now before I put the decals on. The microset is just a positioning agent. It helps the decals go into place. So what I'm going to do here is put the decals on in the conventional way, except I'm going to put them on upside down. They actually work just fine that way. And that way, when I flip the number boards over, they'll look right and they'll look like they're behind glass. This is a little fussy to do on camera, but I've positioned the numbers on the back of the number board, and as you can see, they're backwards. That's intentional. I use microset to position them, and you have to keep it a little bit wet, but not too wet. If it's too wet, the decals will just move around all over the place and you can't keep them still. If it's not wet enough, then they don't move at all. So it's kind of a little bit of a sweet spot you have to hit. Also, if you don't have a light table, which I'm guessing maybe a lot of people probably don't, I'm using my phone here as a backlight so that I can see this better, because when you're doing this, it can be a little hard to see what you're doing. So I just opened up a new note on my phone that's blank, and it's just white. So it shines through pretty nicely, and I can see the numbers a lot better. Incidentally, I'm using the unit numbers instead of train numbers. Sometimes these units, because they were commute engines, they would carry train numbers when they were in commute service. But when they're being used in freight service, I've seen pictures of them with the road number and the number boards just like any other diesels. So that's what I'm doing, since if I'm using them on Donner, they wouldn't have been hauling commute trains up there. The microscale sheets have all different number styles on them for these number boards. I chose this one, which is a kind of a stencil look, which is close to what was on the real engines. It's not a perfect match, but it's pretty much as close as I'm going to get on this decal sheet. Hopefully this shows up on camera. There's a little bit of clear space on each end because the numbers didn't quite take up the entire number board. So I got a little bit of black paint, and I'm going to very carefully fill in that gap on the edges. If I'd used the numbers with the white backgrounds, I'd basically be done now. Since I used the clear ones, I have a couple additional steps. This is microscale sheet 87-904. It's black and white number board backgrounds. I'm going to use some of the white and put it on top of the lettering that I put on the number boards. That'll make the letters look white, since right now they're clear. If you'd used the letters that had the white backgrounds already, you wouldn't need to do this. I've applied the white decals to the back of the number boards. Very carefully take them off the tape. I'm going to very gently file the excess decal film, working back to front so I don't peel it off. And that's what it looks like finished. Numbers behind glass. Or clear plastic anyway. I'm going to use a little canopy glue applied with a piece of scrap wire so I don't get too much in there. If you get a little excess on the inside, it's okay, because the canopy glue will dry clear. And if there's any excess on the outside, you can wipe it off with some water. And then a little bit tricky, but I want to slide the number board kind of into place and coax it into position. And that's it. That's what they look like when they're installed. Pretty happy with that. And this is what they look like hooked up to my test battery. Now these will be a little bit dimmer once I get them installed and I have a chance to play with the CVs and the decoder and turn down the brightness. But I think they look pretty good, even like this. I'm pretty happy with how the number boards turned out. Next time I'll pick it up and work on more of the other lights. If you like this video, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.